My name is Lonnie Van Horn. I am 54 years old. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer in September of 2017, so almost 7 years ago now. Approximately 7 months prior to my diagnosis, I was experiencing some urination issues along with some just general body pain. I went to my GP, general practitioner, and he assumed that I had a urinary tract infection, which maybe he did a urinalysis and found something. But he prescribed me antibiotics, and I took them, and the symptoms got a little bit better, but never really went away. And another month after that, I was back again with the same symptoms. And then he called it, he called it prostatitis, which is an infection of the prostate. So he prescribed me more antibiotics. Again, the symptoms seemed to get better, never really went away. A couple of months after that, I was driving in my car coming from downtown, heading home, and the lower part of my body was in so much pain. I just wanted to bawl. It was so bad. And so I swung into an urgent care. Nobody came to the counter, so I left. Then I went to his office. I drove to his office, and I said, we need to do something. He got me in 45 minutes later. He did a physical exam of my prostate and found it to be irregular. And ordered a biopsy. I had a biopsy the next day. The biopsy out of the, I think it was 10 core samples that they took, 9 of them came back positive for prostate cancer. So that's how I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed, or I was told about it the same day that I had my biopsy. And I was told it was stage 4. Likely metastatic. I had also had labs that day, and I had a PSA come back at 685, which is insanely high. It's normal as 4 or below. And so based on that, they assumed, and correctly, that I was metastatic. I am a man, so I wasn't fond of going to the doctor. B, honestly, I attributed a lot of my symptoms to the fact that I worked from home. I was not active. I was crowding 50 years old. I ate the wrong things. I drank too much. I smoked too much, all the things. And I attributed a lot of the symptoms to that, and just kept telling myself, "Wow, I need to, I need to exercise or something." And as far as the antibiotics and that he kept prescribing me over and over and over, it was very frustrating to keep going to the expert and not have any relief. And I understand that, medicine is, it's not an exact science in some cases, but it was very frustrating. Like it was just very frustrating. But the pain at the end was so unreal. Like I didn't have a choice but to just go to his office. So my initial treatment, what they wanted to do, the oncology team wanted, to make a treatment plan immediately, just because of the state of my biopsy, as well as combined with my PSA, they could, surmise how aggressive it was. And he wanted to start chemotherapy like that week. And I said, no, please pump your brakes a little. I need to think about this. I said, can I have a couple of weeks to think about that? He's like, sure. It was almost like a light bulb went off in my head, an epiphany, whatever you want to call it. Um, I decided right then and there that I was going to take control of anything that was going to be treated going forward. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm, not going to listen to my oncologist or follow his recommendations. But I immediately went into a mode of learning every single thing that I could about my diagnosis. I read, I watched videos, I listened to podcasts. I spent hundreds of hours learning about metastatic prostate cancer. I ultimately decided not to take chemotherapy. I changed my diet. I stopped drinking wine, which, if anybody knows me, it was like they would think I'm crazy. But I did that for a year. I changed my diet for a year. I stopped drinking for a year, not because I thought that those things would heal me, but I wanted to kind of detoxify my body a bit to give it a fighting chance to respond well to the treatment. I went to his office a few days later for an initial setting up a treatment plan, and I still hadn't made my mind about chemotherapy. And so we went with the standard care of treatment, which is Lupron, which is a testosterone blocker. At the end of 8 months, we determined that my prostate cancer had turned to castrate resistant, which means that the Lupron was no longer working. So we had some decisions to make after that, and we tossed a few ideas around. At that point in my journey, I had several options that I could go with, but he was on the lookout. My oncologist was on the lookout for clinical trials, and there happened to be a clinical trial that was available that he thought I was a perfect candidate for. So, and the prerequisites were that you had to be metastatic castrate resistant, having never had chemotherapy, which I fit the bill perfectly. I was terrified. And again, I took a couple of weeks to think about if I wanted to join the clinical trial, and I researched the medicine, and I read, case studies, and I read reviews and all the things, and discussed it with my family and my friends. Finally decided that I was going to go with the clinical trial. So I'm going to give it a shot. And it was a combination of olaparib, which is Lynparza, and Zytiga, which is or abiraterone, which is Zytiga. Throwing in prednisone. We're still doing the Lupron. Just even though it wasn't working on its own, was helping maybe slightly. So we're still doing the Lupron. And once I joined the clinical trial, I had a lot of side effects from the medication. Um, were they overwhelming? Not always. Most of the side effects from all of the medications were tolerable. I thought. Once in a while, they all ganged up and made it not tolerable sometimes, but all in all, the side effects weren't bad. Initially, they were worse. I think that they leveled out in my body after a while. And I did extremely well on the clinical trial. My body responded really well to it. My cancer responded really well to it. My PSA came down. My tumors became stable. It it really did. It was very good for me. And I think that, I kept asking him, like, what, how is it doing so good for me? Right. Like, and, outside of having the cancer itself, I'm an otherwise, at that time, a 48-year-old healthy male, healthy-ish. So, he believes that's one of the contributing factors why I responded really well to it. Anyway, I was on the clinical trial for almost 3.5 years because it kept working until it didn't. It's like somebody standing behind you with a pew pew to the back of your head, and you don't know when the trigger is going to be pulled. You just know it's going to be pulled. And so you're in a constant state of anxiety, and it is so mentally challenging. Um, the emotions surrounding waiting for that clinical trial to stop were horrible. Before I, I would say about a year after I started the clinical trial, I started seeing a therapist um, because I got into a very dark place. Um, and I knew that I had to do something. So I reached out to a therapist. And A, it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. But B, I learned skills to manage or negate my anxiety over it. And it didn't mean that it didn't rear its ugly head once in a while, because it did, but it was much more manageable on my end. But the anxiety is there, it's intense. So we had to put our heads together and come up with a different treatment plan. Um, and he gave me two or three options. And I had always told him right from the beginning that, I didn't want chemotherapy, but when the time came that, I was running out of options, we could discuss it, or we could circle back around to it, that discussion. So that was one of the options that he gave me. He gave me a couple of other options that I wasn't all that interested in. But he then said that we could continue on the trial medication outside of the trial. And he felt, because the medication was still somewhat working, that my numbers weren't like jumping like crazy, but they were like small increment increases. It was his opinion that we could get a few more months out of the trial medication. He jumped through a few hoops to make that happen, because that combination wasn't FDA approved yet. He jumped through a few hoops initially to make that happen, but we did make it happen. And I think that officially became an FDA approved treatment in June of that year, is when, so when they approved it for use for people with my condition, or that combination of drugs. So we didn't have any problems after that. That same combination, I just kept going with it. And again, my numbers were still rising a little bit, but they were just really small increments. So you could tell that it wasn't being as effective on me. But it wasn't, the increments weren't large enough for us to be concerned about it on a month by month basis. So I took that up until October of last year. I did something that people thought I was crazy for. I went to my oncologist and I told him that I needed a treatment break. I had been on treatment steady for 6 years at that point. It's a lot, those drugs do a lot to your body long term. They do even more to your psyche long term. I got to the point where I was tired, mentally tired, exhausted. The battle that you wage every day on cancer is exhausting. And the funny thing about cancer is it never lets you forget that it's there, because you wake up in pain and you're like, oh yeah, like that's what it is. It's my bone pain. I have tumors in my bones. It's everywhere. So like, oh yeah, I have cancer. Like you can't wake up and like forget that you have cancer. It never lets you forget that it's there. So the journey for me was very exhausting, and I had a lot of mental anguish over it. And I thought to myself that I just needed a break. I need a treatment break. I need to rest uh, my body from the side effects of the medication. I needed to check in on my mental health, give that fight a break a little bit. And my initial thought was is that I was going to go to my oncologist, and he was just going to say no, absolutely not, because I had talked to him about that before, a few years before. He's like, you're in no position yet. Like we have a lot of work to do. We'll bring your numbers down, then we'll circle back around to it. So in October, I went to him and I said, you're probably going to, beat me upside the head with a baseball bat, but like, this is what I'm thinking I want to do. And I was kind of like looking for his blessing, trying to like get him to tell me like, yeah, you should probably, yeah, do that. But I don't, maybe ethically he can't say that. I don't know. But he finally looked at me and said that I should do what I feel I need to do for my quality of life. Until a couple weeks ago, everything was stable, numbers were great, all up until about 3-4 weeks ago. I did a scheduled scan, had scheduled labs, and it lit up like a Christmas tree. Yeah, I had like a dozen new spots of activity, which is actually more activity than I've ever had at one point. So my PSA went up, all the things, all the red flags were flagging. So I went right back onto the trial drugs that I was taking, and that's what I'm doing now. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. No one. It's horrible. The mental journey is horrible. The physical journey is horrible. I don't care if you're stage 1 or 4. I don't care what type of cancer you have. It's horrible. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And if we can convince people to take proactive steps, talk to their doctor, whatever needs to happen, then let's do that. So that's kind of my driving force over the last 2 or 3 years also. And the longer I go on, the more I'm getting into that. I would say if you're freshly diagnosed with cancer, slow down. Slow down. Even someone that I was diagnosed very aggressive, terminal, stage 4, metastatic, had tumors everywhere throughout my skeleton, in my lymphatic system. You think that things are going to happen immediately, the bad things, and they are not. My advice would be to slow down and take care of your mental health before diving into treatment decisions and all of the things, because you can get to a point where you get so wound up in learning about your diagnosis and making treatment decisions and fighting with insurance companies. You can get so involved in all of the busy work of that you forget about processing the emotions, the very intense emotions that come with a cancer diagnosis, the emotions of grief and fear and sadness and all of the things, anger, my God, the anger. Slow down and process those. That's my advice, because I didn't take my own advice, but that's how I can say it. So that's my advice. That's my message to the world of cancer patients.